Is war coming to South America? Is Venezuela making a play for its weaker neighbor's oil? Are we going to be seeing another playback of the Gulf War? I'm Paul, a U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to be doing a deep dive in Venezuela's annexation of the Essequibo. Let's get into it. Okay, so that is the big news that's popped up in the last 12 hours is that for a while, and by a while I mean a week or two, the country of Venezuela has begun to annex or assert that they are the rightful owners of a region in Guyana, its neighbor, called the Essequibo. And the Essequibo, for those of you keeping track at home, is a region that encompasses almost half of the region of Guyana, right? You can see, let's see if we can pull it up on a map here for you guys. Here is the Essequibo River. And as you can see, here's the nation of Guyana, right? Sort of carved out here, situated next to its much larger neighbors, Venezuela and Brazil. And you can see that the Essequibo region here in green is huge and occupies almost a majority of the country. Now, why is Venezuela not just claiming that it owns the Essequibo, but asserting that before they've even invaded it, that they immediately are going to start exploiting the oil, gas, and mines in the region? Well, the answer is complicated. If you ask the Venezuelans, they will say that they have been entitled to the region since Guyana was a British protectorate. This is in the 1890s. But what there have been a number of international tribunals that have consistently ruled that Guyana, and before that, British Guyana, has been the rightful country to own or encompass the Essequibo region. Venezuela, of course, accepted this ruling up until very recently, right? Because two key changes happened. First, over the last several years, the Venezuelan economy has been in sort of a nosedive. And two, the region has been the source, has had a lot more oil, minerals, and natural gas than people anticipated. And so Venezuela, looking to likely shore up its failing economy, has begun to assert that it is the rightful owner of this resource-rich region. A very, very classic, very predictable kind of play by Venezuela. Now, it also helps, of course, that there's a number of other minor advantages. We know that Maduro is not exactly a fully democratically elected leader. It's being generous. And that it can be very beneficial when you're an autocrat to take your military, if you worry about your military conspiring against you, and put them somewhere far away from your capital. In this case, the jungles of Guyana. And that may be part of it. There may be some sort of internal politics at work. But it's also true that Venezuela, you may be asking yourself, Paul, Venezuela is one of the most oil-rich nations in the entire world. It should be as rich as Saudi Arabia. How come it is not? Well, there's two reasons. The first is, of course, because the U.S. has sanctioned Venezuela for some time and prevented their oil from reaching much of the world market. But more realistically, it's because when you have something like a literal money machine, which is what being the leader of an autocratic country or a non-democratic country that sits atop large oil reserves, you essentially have a very easy to extract resource that will essentially deliver money to your state's coffers. And if you are a non-corrupt state, like for example, Norway has large reserves of oil and gas off its coast. Norway has a state-backed oil industry. That oil industry extracts the oil in a relatively technologically sophisticated way and with a relatively high level of integrity. And so much of those reserves go into Norway's government and fund the social safety net, fund resources, schools, roads, etc., as well as a Norwegian sovereign wealth fund that will pay dividends to its citizens long after the oil runs out. But if you have a autocratic, corrupt state, much like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, what happens is you don't put qualified engineers you don't put qualified managers to run these state oil companies. Instead, you put your crooked friends. And your crooked friends line their pockets. But the problem is when you put your crooked friend in charge of an oil company, right, then they're going to put their friends in key positions. And those friends are going to line their pockets, and they're going to be kind of clueless, right? It's like your brother-in-law, oh, he's a good guy. You don't need to be that smart to run an oil rig, right? Well, then the brother-in-law brings in his trashy friends from college to be key lead engineers. And suddenly you turn around and you go, man, this oil rig hasn't produced any oil in 2 years. What happened? And they go, well, our maintenance guy went to high school with the buddy of the dude and it turns out no one's actually qualified to be there. And everyone is in the process lined their pockets either with literal oil revenues or kind of other ways, do nothing jobs, getting awarded overpriced contracts. There's all kinds of ways. And the thing with this system is that when you have something that looks like a money machine, for a long time, Venezuela still made money for its government, even with everybody getting paid. But you can't run a country that way. And so Venezuela starts to realize that even though they're a resource-rich nation, right, they cannot actually receive the benefits of that oil. And they made some other mistakes too. For example, they said, listen, we're making so much money with this oil, but we want to have some social programs. And so instead of waiting for us to pull this oil out and sell it, why don't you, the international community, give us a loan for a bunch of money? We're going to build some infrastructure. Maybe we want to build new oil platforms. We want to build some roads. We want to hire more teachers, right? We want to do all these good things. And the IMF was like, sure, here you go, man. Like, and we know it's going to be worth you. We know you can pay back this loan because you're sitting on top of a ton of oil. Problem is, price of oil. They made these deals when the price of oil was sky high. Remember about 5 to 10 years ago, price of oil was like scary high. That's when they took all these loans. They were like, we're rich, we're printing money. Well, now the price of oil is tanked. And because of Venezuela's hostile stance against the U.S., sanctions have further tanked the price of oil that Venezuela can get. Meanwhile, every crooked friend is mad because they still want their handout. There's only one way to make sure every single person gets the amount of money they want, and you're able to pay back the IMF even though you're not actually pulling out oil and selling it. And that is to print money. So that's how Venezuela ended up hyperinflating their currency, plunging their entire country into poverty, and ultimately not being able to extract real meaningful development from this absolutely eye-popping wealth of oil. And so to solve this problem, instead of practicing good governance or cracking down on corruption or having a new government entirely, Maduro is simply saying, well, if we can't get enough money from our oil, we're going to steal everyone else's. He has ordered the immediate exploitation of oil, gas, and mines in Guyana's Essequibo, which is fascinating because their military hasn't even secured it yet. The Guyanans it's still full of Guyanans, right? So Maduro, of course, is immediately going to be granting operating licenses for state-backed companies and creating local subsidiaries of these Venezuelan companies in order to start extracting resources from the region. And as this article politely points out, it's not clear how the Maduro administration intends to implement the idea of exercising jurisdiction over the territory once it's officially declared part of Venezuela, but they're still going to figure it out. And this is kind of how autocracies work. The guy in charge decides how things are going to be, and then it's relied on the lackeys in the democracy to figure out how it's going to actually get done. Of course, Maduro is simultaneously creating what he's calling a comprehensive defense operational zone, which will be basically a military zone or a military occupied zone. It's 2/3 of Guyana, and it's probably going to result in a war, almost certainly. Now, how's that war going to go? Well, not great. Not great. Why? Well, let's take a look. The militaries. The Venezuelan army, right? They call themselves the Bolivarian Army of Venezuela. Bolivarian being a reference to Simón Bolívar, a South American liberation figure. The military currently sits, as of 2021, at 115,000 people, right? A large security service. And while it's not modern, it's relatively properly equipped, right? They have a big influx of material from Russia. So they do have a fairly modernized force, right? They have real tanks. They have substantial armored vehicles, air forces. You can see a large aviation command, a proper logistics command, a number of divisions. The military is one of the entities in this conflict, or in this part of in Venezuela, that get regular paychecks. And in the face of hyperinflation, being a military member is an important way to ensure your family can eat. So the military has remained very loyal to the president, but it is very extensive. That's the key takeaway here. It is indeed extensive, and you can see there's actually already a Wikipedia article. The Guyana Defense Force, in contrast, is tiny. It is 4,600 people with another 3,000 reservists. So at their best, they can gin up about 7,000 people. And when we look at the equipment that they possess, you can see they have, relatively normal rifles, a pretty wide array of, individual small arms, RPG-7s. But here's where things get kind of weird. They don't have tanks. They have some what they call armored cars or wheeled vehicles. And you can see the most they have is the VEC M1, a Spanish armored car, and they have 42 of them, which is not a lot, guys. They have an APC from Brazil, 24 of them. They also, get this, in their utility vehicles, their version of a Jeep is a Ford F-350. 10 of them. That's less than your local car dealership, guys. Okay? Plus some of these old school utility trucks. Literally no heavy artillery. Well, no, sorry. 6 Soviet-era field guns and a couple of mortars. That's it. That's what they have to go to fight with. So this is, guys, and literally a handful, literally 6 combat aircraft. No, sorry, 5 combat aircraft, 1 VIP transport. This is a really bad mismatch. And it's not clear, honestly, that Guyana will even waste its soldiers' lives trying to defend the Essequibo. They may simply allow Venezuela to occupy it, given how one-sided this appears to be, while they try to use diplomatic tools and their diplomatic persuasions to try to get their allies to sanction Venezuela or try to kick Venezuela out. But again, it's not really clear that even if the Venezuelans were to deploy 10% of their total military, they would still outnumber the Guyanans by nearly 2-1. So this is going to be if this is become a war, it's going to be a brutal one-sided thrashing, and a real just a potential disaster. The only thing that might change things is potentially if Guyana can find some allies, right? The fear, Brazil's military, for example, is comparable to Venezuela's, and would likely put up a much more aggressive fight if if Brazil chose to intervene to ensure the territorial integrity of Guyana, which is not unheard of. Again, you think about the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1991, where you saw a small, relatively insignificant country have its territory annexed by its larger, more aggressive autocratic neighbor, and the international community wouldn't stand for it. And they said, we're going to kick this military out of the region. I think Venezuela probably believes that the international community, between its support of Ukraine and Israel, is likely exhausted and won't have the international wherewithal to actually kick the Venezuelans out, and that they are calculating that they will be able to make a tremendous amount of money for their failing state and not face major international sanctions, particularly in the face of this global inflation crisis, right? Very few countries want to take a major oil producer and pull them off the market and drive the price of oil higher. We've already kind of done that with Russia. We can't do it with another one. So I think Maduro's calculations are not unsophisticated. The only problem will be is if enough countries, and it would take just a couple in South America to get together and say, no, you don't get to annex our small neighbors. We are going to put you in your place. We're tired of your antics. But it remains to be seen what is going to happen exactly. But I'll keep you posted. Thank you guys as always. Of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat footage, when the fighting starts, YouTube won't let me show you combat footage. Instead, it's going to be featured on combatvetnews.com. This is my premium site. Think of it like Patreon. It is a subscription site where twice a week I find the viral combat footage from all over the internet, and we do a deep dive analysis. I can't even show you the thumbnails or I'll get demonetized, but it's the only way to support the channel. It's the best way because, I don't really get that many advertisers because I cover military content. Any one of these tiers going to get you access to the members only section where you'll get those twice a week uncensored combat videos. So if you want to check out the fighting from Hamas, from Gaza, from Ukraine, from Burkina Faso, from apparently Guyana, this is the site to do it. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. Check out the link in the description. See you in the next one. Cheers.